Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Let me tell you about today's episode. I have got a layout process video as part of the design team over at the Counterfeit Kit challenge. And our challenge this time is to go old school, technique-wise. So I am going to resurrect some techniques I used to do in the early days of scrapbooking. So let's dive in. I pulled out these photos of my daughter's improv theater class, and I'm going to tell the story of the difference between improv being online versus being in person. So that's my story. And then as for the challenge techniques, I'm going to do a couple of things. I am going to arrange my photos in a cluster that I used to use a lot. And I'm also going to do some distressing and inking, which used to be my style. And pull out my Counterfeit Kit so that I can get started pulling supplies. Now my kit has a pretty wintry theme to it, so I've got to see what I can make work for this. This is a watercolor paper that I created by hand, and I'll link you up to that if you haven't seen that. And I think the energy of that paper will work for what I'm looking for. And I'm going through trying to find some other supporting papers. And I like the swirlies on that one, again, for that energy vibe that the paper has. And I'm pulling out a couple of other things. And then I find a couple of star prints. And I'm undecided on how to go with those, so I just set them aside to think about it. And as I'm looking through all of my embellishments, I'm trying to see if I can get creative in my thinking about how to turn some of these wintry embellishments into what I need for this kind of theater school page. And I will set those aside because I do the embellishing later on in my process. And I'm going to start with my photos by trimming them down. And you don't need to watch me do that, so I've done that off screen. And then I'm trying to figure out my paper layering here, and keeping in mind that if I'm going to want to ink edges and distress edges, inking is going to look better on lighter colored papers rather than darker colored papers. So I'm trying to keep that in mind as I go. And you know what I do? I go ahead and adhere my photos without inking the edges because I am so out of the habit of it that it didn't even dawn on me until a bit later. And as I continued on before realizing my mistake, I am looking for what layer should go next. And I'm going to eliminate that bright pink one because I like the contrast that the darker color creates between all of the layers. And that is when I realized that I had missed the inking. Luckily, I was able to just pull the photos back up carefully and go ahead and ink up those edges. And while I was inking, I was going to go ahead and ink up the edges of the light pink paper. I thought about inking up the edges of that navy swirly print, but I figured in the end it probably wouldn't show up very well anyway, although I do end up giving that a try on some embellishments, but we'll get to that. In the meantime, I have finished up inking, and I'm going to go ahead and adhere my layers down and try and get some borders that show enough of that swirly print in the background to get the feeling that I was going for with that, just kind of a fun vibe, energy vibe that I wanted out of that paper. And once I have everything matted up, I realized my beautiful background paper isn't going to show very much of that paper. And I decide that I'm going to have to gut it or pick something else. And because I really like the energy of that paper, I'm going to have to gut it, and it's going to be painful because I made that paper by hand. It took me a long time, and I wanted to show it off. But sometimes when the paper's working for the project, you just got to make it work. At any rate, there it is. I've gutted it, and I'm leaving a wider border down at the bottom so that at least I can get a good portion of that watercolor painting to show up. And that is when I realized that, or actually before I gutted it out, I realized that I can take the gutted out portion and fussy cut it and make some embellishments to get that pattern to show more. And so this is where I am trying to decide to use up as little of that gutted out paper as possible so that I have a chunk left for something else so I can stretch this pattern out. I'm trying to just cut out of that one edge some of the circles, and I got this circle in the center. Because it's on an edge, I'm tucking those flat sides underneath and the center's not showing up. Not what I would feel like is ideal, but I'm just going to move forward, make it work. Sometimes things aren't perfect, and that needs to be okay. It just does, because so much of life is imperfect anyway. So I am making do, and still trying to save some of that paper for later. So here I'm going to trim it down and set aside a good size chunk. I have to say that's a pretty good piece to use on something else. And I will find a third embellishment to cut out of this one to make my rule of threes work, because I just gotta have it. That's how my brain works. Now that one has had a weird, awkward edge to it, and so I'm going to cover that up with some more embellishments. And this is where I'm cutting down some more of that navy. I did pull out a star punch thinking I wanted to punch stars out of the navy, and I shift gears at some point. So what I'm going to do with the navy is create some little banner flags. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it down because I wanted it to be a little bit thinner so that it doesn't overwhelm the circle elements that I cut out. And instead it kind of enhances that embellishment cluster. So I go ahead and make a banner fishtail end, and I do ink it first, and then I thought, well, let's try a little bit of both because that inking definitely isn't showing up very well. And so I give it a little distressing and then some more inking, and I try it back and forth a couple of times. And in the end, I like it okay. It's not super noticeable, but it adds just a little bit of something that I think was worth it enough to take the time to do it. So I've got all three of those done, and I put them in place. And then here's what I decided to do with the star punch. This is definitely more of the modern me, where I am doing embellishment or die cut / punch stacking. So you line up all of these exact same punches or die cuts, you add some glue, and then you stack them up so that you get a thicker piece that mimics chipboard. And since I didn't have a lot of my own embellishments, this is a great way, easy way to add extra embellishments to this layout. So my journaling stamping goes on, and then I will go ahead and finalize those clusters and get everything adhered down. And I just realized that I need to get my title in there. So I did have red cardstock in my kit, and there are red chairs in the photos, but I decided the red is going to be too harsh with the other color palettes going on. So I go ahead and go with black. I die cut out my letters to create my title, and I don't like the spacing that's happening. So I move my embellishment cluster a little bit so that I can fit the title this way, and that makes it more readable. And so I'm happier with that. And now I can finalize my embellishment clusters. So as I'm adding these stars as kind of the top layer of the embellishment cluster, I try to find a place where it can overlap all the elements in the cluster. So the circle, the banner, and the photo, if I can get it in there. Usually I can. And so I get those adhered with some dimensional foam, and that, I think, will finish it off. I know sitting off to the side, oh, I did get my journaling on there as I'm pointing out, and I did tie my journaling back in both to the wheel pattern of the background and to the title. So I add little elements like that to my journaling when I can. And so back to these embellishments, I thought I was going to use these fibers and stamps to add a couple more elements to the clusters, and I'm just going to stop. Sometimes you just need to step back and say, you know what, that's enough. It's good enough. I don't need to keep going. And I'm talking mostly to myself here, but if you have that problem, maybe you can take that advice too. All right, that is it for this time around. I will leave you links to go check out the Counterfeit Kit Challenge if you don't know what that is. I will be back on Friday with my Freebie Fridays video. It'll be a quick one this time because I won't have as many examples to show. I will just show off the freebies that I have because my schedule is a little crunched right now. So until then, I hope you have an artful day.